So welcome to this video and welcome to this channel. My name is Courtney if you are new here, and today I'm actually going to be doing a best books of 2024 in my opinion. So I love watching these videos. These are some of my favorite to watch because it's everybody's accumulation of what they like the most. So today I'm going to be showing you guys fantasy actually this year. I have quite a few contemporaries as well, everything down to graphic novels. They're not going to be ranked in order until the very end. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so this first book is To Kill a Shadow. This is by Katherine Quinn, and I absolutely love this book. This is one of those books that it's popular enough that it came out with these frayed edges, and I know that other people have read it, but I personally hadn't heard anything about this book. I would say if you like Divergent or Fourth Wing, you would like the setup of this book. So our main male protagonist in this story is named Jude, and he's kind of known as the Hands of Death. He's known for his gruesome things that he has to do in this land, and then it follows our main female protagonist who joins this group of knights. This group of knights is kind of like joining Dauntless, where they have to go through this training at the beginning of the book, which is why it's similar to Fourth Wing or Divergent. And I would definitely say it's that type of relationship as well, where you have like a trainee coming in, and then of course they catch the eye of this trainer or someone who's a bit more notorious in the world. So that is how this book starts. But I'll say about this far into the novel is when you actually get the application or they leave the school, and it's a bit more like Fourth Wing in the aspect of then they go forth and actually do the task. But I ended up really loving this novel. I love Divergent. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I liked Fourth Wing. I'm not the biggest fan of Fourth Wing just because I don't really like any spicy romance novels. It's just not my thing. And while the first book in Fourth Wing is really good to me, as I continued on the series, I just ended up having to stop because it's just not my forte. This was a very clean book, but you still have that romantic tension, which I really enjoyed. I definitely highly recommend this. The next book I have to recommend is Divine Rivals. This is by Rebecca Ross. A lot of you guys have heard this, but I'll give you a teeny tiny short synopsis. So basically it follows two different people. So one, her name is Iris, and she's kind of the main perspective of this story, and her brother passed away, and she works at this company, this publishing company, and journalism-based job. So she ends up writing letters to her deceased brother, and she slips them underneath this wardrobe, and all of a sudden it's kind of magical. They disappear, and they end up in the hands of our other main protagonist. His name is Roman, and this story also follows his perspective, and him and Iris actually work together, and then it just continues their relationship almost through like a wartime era. So this is a more enemies to lovers type of romance, but it's also very poetic. I love the aspect of letters. That's one of those things that for me, I know it's not necessarily a trope, but would be one of my favorite tropes. It's kind of like a mystery being unraveled for them, and then you get to see them in wartime. It's just beautifully written. The chemistry that ends up happening and what is developed between the two of them is very beautiful as well. Like I mentioned, I like closed door romances, so there was maybe two scenes, but I think possibly just one scene that I had to or wanted to skip in this novel. But other than that, this was a really wonderful book. Alright, the next book I have to recommend is 1,000 Heartbeats. This is by Kiera Cass, who also wrote the Selection series. If you were a fan of this back in like 2013 era or even after, I know this was a really popular series. I did read this, all three of them. I enjoyed it. It was okay, but it was never a favorite of mine. So when I saw this novel come out a couple of years ago, it's quite a thick book, and I remember being like, oh, I don't know, these kind of look similar on the outside. There was nothing too intriguing about the Selection series to me, but I absolutely loved this novel. So this book follows a princess named Annika, who would be the one on the cover. She's very used to a life of luxury, but she's ending up being in the situation where she is forced into a marriage. And then also it follows a guy named Lennox who is in this opposite kingdom, and he has the opposite life of her. Just kind of the dirty work that has to be done to help run a kingdom is what Lennox has. And so this book ends up following the two of them. They obviously eventually find each other. There is forced proximity because they, I'm not going to spoil, but end up in a very close approximated area. I will say it's a little teeny tiny bit insta-lovey where it isn't love at first sight at all, but once they get into a situation where they end up feeling things for each other, then it happens pretty rapidly. So I can understand why some people may not prefer it. I personally did. It was worth reading all of these pages, and I felt like a lot was covered, and it was worth reading this for a standalone novel. I think sometimes when I read these romance fantasy novels, I am always wanting a little bit bit more romance. Because again, I tend to read closed door romances, and this one is that. I always am wanting a little bit more, and this one really kind of fulfilled that end of the bargain. The next book that was one of my favorites was The Prisoner's Throne. This is by Holly Black. So this is the second book in the spin-off series from The Cruel Prince, which is following Jude's brother. And the first one is called The Stolen Heir. So when I read this, I really enjoyed The Stolen Heir. I know that this is a hot take. I understand not everyone's gonna agree with me. Personally, I was not a huge fan of the Cruel Prince series. I'm not the biggest fan of political intrigue. It's not my favorite when it's at the center of the novel, but I still ended up enjoying it by the end of the series. Is it a favorite of mine? No, it's not. I love actually Holly Black's novel, The Coldest Girl in Cold Town. No one talks about that, but it's so good. This book was one of those that I really enjoyed. I felt like by the end we eventually got there where I did like it. Was it my absolute favorite? No, not necessarily, because this one I liked a lot more. But did it round off a very good story? Yes. So I ended up liking this duology much more than I did the Cruel Prince series. I would also recommend this contemporary series. It's called the Vegas King series, and then there's also one, I think it's like For Love and Music or something along those lines. These are some of my favorite contemporary novels of all time. It's one of those contemporary books. Once you get to know the group, it follows kind of each member in the group. These are clean, closed door novels, but the amount of just beautiful romance that's done still within those parameters is mind-blowing. It's so much better than any other book I've read. So it's just my preference, but it follows this band, and then it follows the sister in the band originally, and then different members and their relationship and how they build it. And all of them tackle a lot bigger issues. Like one of them has to do with drug abuse, the other one will have to do with eating disorders and poverty and stuff like that. So there's lots of different big topics that are still tackled in these contemporary books, and I really loved that about it, and I thought it was done so tastefully. And then the Vegas King series follows those characters. The main female character in the first book, her brother, who is on professional baseball team, and then it follows everybody on the team. My first favorite one in the series, I'll pop up on the screen, that I highly recommend you get started with if you don't read about the band, the first one in the Vegas King series. I think if you're looking for a clean contemporary romance book that also follows adults and not just high schoolers, I cannot recommend this more. It's a sports romance. A lot of them are enemies to lovers or best friends to lovers. Lots of great tropes happening there while still tackling these tough topics. But again, the emotional relationship building that happens, it's beautiful. And if the first book is not your cup of tea, again, all of these tropes change because it follows a different person each time. Now into the ranking of the top 3 favorite books of the year for me. So number 3 is Almost American Girl by Robin Ha. I highly recommend this. This is a graphic novel, actually. The first graphic novel I have ever read. So it looks like this. It's just gorgeous. It's beautifully done. And this book basically takes place around our main character who is born in South Korea. And due to familial circumstances, she ends up having to move to America. When she ends up moving, she has to deal with all of these different culture issues. She has to deal with integrating into a new society, not knowing the language, just grappling with all of that. And then also just the shock of being ripped out from your home and put in another country. Because she is younger, it is her mom's decision to do so, and basically just her grappling with this new life. And it's so beautiful. So for you guys that don't know, I lived in South Korea for a year, so I loved this because it was so relatable in certain aspects, and I want to make it clear, obviously when I moved to South Korea I chose it, but just the little nuanced ways of when you leave your home country and you're put in another one and you're very overwhelmed, either by people looking at you or once again like that language barrier, that food, like all of it's different. She captured that so well in this book. And so if I related to just a hint of it, anybody who has had to go through that as a child without a choice in it and had to just completely integrate because there was no other option, this book is really powerful. It's going to be relatable to a lot of people's stories. So even as someone who's never read a graphic novel before, This was really powerful to me and beautiful. It's wonderfully done. And this author has also come out with other graphic novels, so I could not recommend this enough. All right, so my top 2 books, this was really hard. I originally put my number 2 book as number 1 for a lot of the year, but I ended up changing up the spots because my number 1 novel, I ended up going and rereading numerous times. I remember the characters like the back of my hand. So because of that reason, my number 1 book that's now moved to number 2 is Powerless. This is by Lauren Roberts. I'm pretty sure everyone has heard of this book, if not read it. And again, as someone who loves closed-door romance novels, and I do like fantasy, this is just up my alley, like just my cup of tea. I really enjoyed this book. Basically, this book follows Peyton, who is an ordinary in this society where you can have magic or not. And she's thrown into this competition called the Purging Trials, where she ends up competing with the elites. And then she ends up falling for the prince. So that's all I'll say about this. It's definitely an enemies to lovers. What I love about this book is the banter back and forth. It is fantastic. You also have a really strong female protagonist. This is a stunning story. I loved this first book. I have reread it. I wasn't as big of a fan of the second book, but I love this first book so much that I will definitely continue on with the series. The second one was a little bit just too drawn out for me, but this was phenomenal. Again, if you're looking for a strong protagonist, you're looking for like witty banter, this is gonna be it. Absolutely love this novel. Even though it's number 2, it was number 1 for a while. And lastly, my number 1 novel that was my favorite of 2024 was none other than Assistant to the Villain. I cannot recommend this book enough. Again, another one that is very popular for people. You guys can see how much I have tabbed up this novel. I love this. I love The Office, and I know that that was a little blurb on here that was describing this as like The Office. I don't know if I would go that far, but I would say the humor is very unique. It's so witty. This book is just full of it. So if you don't know anything about this book, it basically follows our main character Evie, and then she ends up working and being an assistant to the villain, which is kind of this character in this fantasy world that is truly just as notorious as his name. Like, he will do the things, he will cut off the heads, he will hang them on the walls, that type of person, but yet it's done in this humorous way that you can't take it too seriously. She took Morley Gray and then she just made it acceptable to this one character, so it ends up being very funny and just full on hilarious. It's just one of those books that I have never read a novel like this one before, and I've read so many books, and yet this one stands out and is unique. There's also a little animal sidekick here. You can see him, the little frog, and so that's always fun in stories. I could not get enough of it. I went and reread this book 3 or 4 different times and then bought the physical copy. I did read Apprentice to the Villain, but again, as someone who loves a lot more closed-door novels, I felt like Apprentice to the Villain, the humor and what was said in this novel, the vernacular was a little bit different than what you got in Apprentice to the Villain. I feel like the tone of it changed a little bit and got a little bit more mature. This book right here, this one was my favorite. I will continue to reread it over and over again. All right, so these are all of my books that I have to recommend, but I hope that you guys enjoyed. I hope you have the absolute best day of your life in this upcoming 2025. I hope that this is a wonderful year for you. So I will see you in the next video. Bye.